Hey, what's up guys? This is Gary and I'm here today to bring you Hot Boys Garage episode 9, where I'm going to show you how to remove, inspect, and replace the entire clutch assembly on your 450cc based Honda engine. And I'm also going to give you a review on this new piece I picked up here from Rocky Mountain ATV. It is the Motorsport Products engine stand. It's a pretty nice piece. I've got my 649cc drag engine already mounted up here. That's going to be our guinea pig for today. And if you've seen some of my other videos, this engine has been featured in it as well. But a quick note, this is not your normal run-of-the-mill engine. It's got a billet head, billet cylinder, no water jackets, lockout clutch, and we've also got a remote starter bolt here on the side. And again, this is a dedicated Honda TRX450R drag engine. It might look a little bit different than your engine, but a lot of the basics and the same concepts apply here. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to show you guys is this new Motorsport Products engine stand. For only 140 bucks from Rocky Mountain ATV with free shipping, it's pretty good. Give you guys a quick walk around here. Engine's already mounted. It's got an adjustable rear mounting point here. This rear rod here is adjustable and it's threaded about halfway. It's smooth in the middle and then it's threaded on the end so that you can clamp the engine in. Then the front mounting point, another halfway threaded rod. The front of the engine just kind of slips on and the holding power is in the rear mount. This front mount is also very adjustable. It's got a pivot point down here and there are 4 different mounting locations for this front mount as well. And then back here in the back we've got a pull pin where you can actually, if you support the engine's weight, pull the pin and you can actually rotate it. It'll lock in and that enables you to work on the engine in several different angles. Here's a close-up shot of the adjustment selector on the back of this thing that allows you to rotate the engine and lock it in place. Overall, this thing is pretty good. All steel construction, it's powder coated, and it's even got this tray down below that's completely removable. It'll catch all your oil. Alright, now on to the clutch stuff. Okay, so here's the tools and parts we're going to need to get this job done. You're going to need an assortment of large and small flat screwdrivers, a dental pick in case some of the clutch fibers stick and you have a hard time getting them out, regular and needle nose pliers, 8, 10, and 12 millimeter sockets, and if your engine is like mine and it has a hodgepodge of bolts in it, you might need a set of metric Allen caps as well. You need a large 27 millimeter socket to remove the clutch hub nut, ratchets and extensions. You'll need some sort of clutch hub holding tool. Now, I've got 2 types here. This is a special clutch hub holding tool from Rocky Mountain ATV. It's the Tusk brand. And then I've also got a homemade clutch hub holding tool here where I took 2 old clutch steels, welded them together, and then welded 2 handles on them. And I'll show you guys how to use both of those when we get to the step where we're removing the clutch hub. Then you also need something with a lot of loosening torque. I use this Milwaukee battery powered impact. You can use an air impact or you can use a breaker bar, and that'll be used to remove that 27 millimeter clutch hub nut. Next you'll need a hammer, a torque wrench that'll go up to 80 foot-pounds, a set of decent calipers, and those will be to measure our clutch fiber thickness. Then on reassembly you'll need a large Phillips screwdriver and some transmission oil of your choice. We use a Rotella white bottle on our transmission or the Honda HP 8085 weight transmission fluid. And then you'll need any parts that you plan to replace. And you might need to wait until you remove your clutch assembly and inspect them for wear to figure out what exactly you need to order. Here you can see we've got a new clutch hub, an aftermarket clutch basket, and then each time I remove my clutch basket and hub, I replace the washer, new clutch fibers and steels, and then depending on what shape your clutch cover O-ring is in, this guy here, you may need to replace him too. I'll put links and OEM part numbers in the video description in case you're interested in what we use. Okay, before we get started, I want to tell you guys a couple of things. If you are just looking to replace your clutch pack, clutch springs, pressure plate, or inner hub, all you'll need to do is remove this clutch cover right here, which is held on by 6 bolts. And before doing that, you're going to want to drain your transmission fluid, which is down here. The drain bolt is at the right rear of the engine. But if you need to remove and replace your clutch basket, the whole right side outer case has got to come off. So before removing the whole right side outer case, you'll want to drain your transmission fluid, your engine oil, which is underneath, and your coolant, which will be drained from here, the bottom of the water pump. And if your bike is a kicker version, you also need to remove your kicker as well. So if you're removing the whole right side outer case, I think there are 17 bolts all around here that you'll need to remove. And you can pull the whole right side outer case off with the clutch cover still attached to the right side outer case so that it all stays in one piece. But again, if you're not replacing the clutch basket, all you need to do is remove this clutch cover here, which is just the 6 bolts. After you've got your clutch cover removed, you'll be able to see your clutch's pressure plate here, and then you'll see 6 bolts holding in the 6 clutch springs. Now the difference between this engine here and one that you might have is this has a lockout system on it, and it's pretty much just a piece that goes over top of the pressure plate, and it uses these little arms to apply weight to the clutch pack in high horsepower applications. And I'll see if I can stick a picture in the video now of what the pressure plate looks like without the lockout on, and you'll be able to still see these 6 bolts holding the clutch springs in. At any rate, our next step is going to be to remove these 6 bolts. In most stock applications, it's going to be a 10mm hex head bolt. Remove them carefully and try not to twist them off. Now with the 6 clutch spring bolts removed, you can go ahead and pull each spring out, set them aside. Now with the clutch springs out, you can inspect them. And sometimes it's kind of hard to tell when they need to be replaced. You can look for any discoloration on them from heat. If you've got a spring tester, you can put them in that and see what kind of base pressure you get out of them. But really, if your clutch springs have a season or 2 of abuse on them, they're cheap enough, I would just go ahead and replace them while you're at it. The next step will be to pull the pressure plate off. What I like to do is just grab it with 2 fingers, support your clutch pack to try and keep it in there because it'll want to stick, and just pull it straight out. And something you're going to want to watch for is this little washer right here on the end of the clutch rod. Sometimes it'll stick to this guy and sometimes it'll stick to the pressure plate. Definitely set that aside, don't lose it. It needs to go back on whenever everything's reassembled. You can inspect your pressure plate by giving it a good visual once over. Make sure the surface here isn't too worn. Make sure there's no cracks or breaks down inside of the spring pockets. Then on the front here, you can see where the lockout arms have been digging into the front of the pressure plate. That kind of wear is expected with a lockout. However, you got to keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't get too deep, go through, cause cracks, cause it to break. Next, we'll remove all of our clutch fibers and steels. Do that by simply going between the clutch basket fingers and pulling them straight out. A lot of times, most of it will come out all in one shot because they're going to want to stick together. Pull them all out. As you can see, a couple of mine stayed in, so this is where a dental pick comes in handy. Kind of get behind that last fiber or 2 and pull them out. And once you get them started, the rest of them will come out. Now with the clutch pack out, I've separated them into 2 piles. We've got the fibers over here on the right, and our steels over here on the left. So in our Honda TRX450Rs, we actually run the 06-07 Honda CRF450R dirt bike clutch packs. And so that does away with the judder spring and that small fiber that sits down on the bottom of the clutch basket. And what we have are 8 normal size fibers and 7 steels. If you do run a judder spring, pay attention to what order the clutch pack components come out, because they'll need to go back in the same way. Now we'll give each of our clutch steels a good visual once over. Make sure none of them are cracked or broken. Make sure they aren't warped. And the biggest thing is to make sure they're not discolored from heat. They should be the same color that they come from the factory. They should not have black or burnt looking spots on them. If they do, they need replaced. Next, we'll move on and inspect each of the clutch fibers or friction discs. You're going to want to give each of them a visual once over. Make sure none of them are cracked or broken. Make sure that they're not discolored or black from heat. And then you'll use your calipers to check the thickness of each of them in several places, and compare the thickness of your clutch fibers to what is considered in spec for the clutch pack that you're using. And so for us, our lower service limit is a 2.85 millimeter thickness. Our 2.9 to 3.01 millimeter is well within spec. If your clutch fibers are broken, burnt, or are worn too thin, then they should be replaced. Next, we'll remove our clutch lifter rod and bearing assembly. It pulls right out of the center. And inspect the bearing and the rod for wear. Now before going any further in disassembly, you can check the clutch hub and the clutch basket for wear before removing them. That way, if neither of them need replaced, you didn't take an extra step in disassembly. So inspect the clutch hub for wear, that's this inner hub here. You're going to come down here and look at the slots in the hub, and that is right here. You can see where the teeth of the clutch steels have been wearing grooves into the slots in the clutch hub here. So check out this area. There's deep grooves that you can feel with your finger. You'll need to replace the clutch hub. And then just as a comparison, this is a brand new inner clutch hub, so you can see what the slots look like on a brand new one. And then moving on to the clutch basket, that's this large piece here that the clutch hub sits inside of. You're gonna wanna inspect the surface here inside each of the clutch basket fingers. And this is where the clutch friction discs ride. And you can see here that they put grooves into this slot too. So you need to take and run your finger across each of these, top and bottom. You can feel them with your finger or fingernail. It's probably okay. If those grooves are super deep, it's probably time to replace the basket. And if you're on a budget, you can always use a file and file down these grooves flat. I don't recommend doing that. It's always better to replace it. But if you're in a pinch, it is an option. Another wear point on a clutch basket is between this gear back here and the basket itself. And between the gear and the basket, there are pieces of rubber, and they're called cushions. And over time, they do wear out. And if you hold the gear with one hand or one thumb and hold the basket with your other, twist the basket back and forth, you can see here this basket is moving a little bit independently of the gear. A little bit is okay, but for my taste, this one is moving a little bit too much. And for comparison, this is a brand new Wiseco aftermarket clutch basket. Hopefully if this camera will focus, you can see that there are no grooves inside of the fingers. And then I've already mounted a gear on the back, and you can see there is no play whatsoever from the gear to the basket independently. Okay, so if you need to replace your hub, basket, or both, the next step is you're going to have to bend down both sides of the tabs of this washer here. Hopefully yours doesn't look as mangled as mine, but what I tend to do is I use flat screwdrivers, starting with a small one to pry it out, and then a larger screwdriver and a hammer to gently fold it down. Just remember that the clutch hub is cast aluminum. It's fragile. Don't get carried away or you'll break it. Now I've got both sides of this lock washer folded down flat, which will allow me to remove this clutch hub nut here. And this thing is torqued down to 80 foot-pounds. And as you can see, if I try to spin it, the hub moves independent of the basket. It just spins free. So this is where our clutch hub holding tool is used. Earlier in the video, I showed you guys a couple different clutch hub holding tools. The one I have on here now is the homemade one, where I've got two old clutch steels welded together, and then I've got two long handles for leverage welded to them. And that's so we can hold the hub and use a breaker bar or an impact to spin this nut off. And then the second type of clutch holding tool is like this one from Tusk, Rocky Mountain ATV, or I think Motion Pro makes one as well. It's kind of like a big vice grip, especially for clutch hubs. You slip the two clamping points in between two of the clutch hub grooves, clamp it down, and again, you don't want this thing to be really tight and clamp it down really hard because this is cast aluminum, it'll break. And then you'll use this to hold the clutch hub while you spin this off with an impact or use a breaker bar to break it loose. Again, this is a 27mm nut. Put my impact on, slip it right off. Release our clutch holding tool. The lock washer comes off. There's another washer underneath here. You can go ahead and pull it off. Hold your basket in place. Pull your hub off. And just be aware there's a large washer in between the hub and the basket. Sometimes it'll stick to the basket. Sometimes it'll stick to the hub. And then lastly, you can pull your clutch basket off. And another note, there are some needle bearings and a collar that ride in between the clutch basket and the main transmission shaft. You can go ahead and pull them out and look for wear as well. Okay, something to note about replacing your clutch basket. For Honda TRX450Rs, if you order an OEM clutch basket from an authorized Honda parts dealer, that clutch basket will come with the basket and the gear already installed and ready to go. But if you order an aftermarket, Wiseco, Henson, clutch basket, something like that, most of those will just come with the basket itself and no gear. It'll come with these bolts to allow you to attach an OEM gear to the basket, but it won't actually come with the gear. And it also won't come with the cushions that go in between the gear and the basket. So if you do decide to go the aftermarket basket route, you'll need to take your stock basket that's got the gear on it. This is a stock basket that I've already removed the gear from, and it'll have a retaining plate on the back. And this retaining plate holds the gear on the OEM basket with rivets. And in order to get the gear off and get to the cushions, you either need to grind off the head of the rivets or drill them out. It's probably easiest to just grind off the head of the rivets because a lot of aftermarket clutch baskets will also come with their own retaining plate, and you won't need to reuse the OEM one. Another note, if you do all that and the cushions from your OEM basket are worn, you can make shims out of brass to take up the play or the slop. For this basket here, I did all the steps of pulling the gear off of the OEM basket, putting it on this aftermarket basket months before shooting this video. I wish I would have waited, that way you guys could have seen it. It's not really that fun of a job, but also what you need to know is these bolts here will usually come from the basket manufacturer with a torque spec. Make sure you follow that. They'll either have Loctite on them already or have you apply Loctite to them. And then once you install these bolts, torque them down, you also need to peen them with a punch and a hammer. And pretty much what that does is ensures that they don't come out. You can kind of see I peened the crap out of these because I really don't want them backing out. Now our clutch assembly is fully disassembled, and after you've inspected and cleaned everything and gotten the needed replacement parts, it's time to start reassembling. And we'll start with this collar that goes around the main shaft and the needle bearings. First piece to go on will be this collar around the main shaft, and then the needle bearings. Go over that. Make sure you've got a light coat of transmission oil on everything. Don't put anything in dry. Next will be your clutch basket to go on. It slips right over the main shaft and over those needle bearings. And make sure you line it up with your crank gears and or your starter or kicker gears. That's followed by this large washer that goes in between the basket and the hub. And the hub goes on next. This flat washer goes on next, followed by a new OEM washer. And then to cap everything off, we put the clutch hub nut back on. We'll get it finger tight, and then we'll use our clutch hub holder and a torque wrench to torque this nut down to 80 foot-pounds. Our next step is going to be to bend the ears of this washer up so that they're sitting flat against the side of this nut, and that's to ensure that the nut doesn't back out. So what I do is I use a big flat screwdriver, pry it up gently, little by little. Just make sure you're not using too much leverage on the hub itself. Again, it is cast aluminum and they are fairly fragile. Once you've got both sides pried up a little bit, I usually use a big flat screwdriver and a hammer to knock them in tight against the nut. Next step will be to put the clutch fibers and steels back in. If you're using new clutch fibers, make sure you soak them overnight in the same transmission oil that you're going to use in the bike. Don't put them in dry. And make sure everything goes back in the correct order. If you're using a judder spring, that'll go in first along with the smaller fiber, and then you'll alternate steel fiber until you're out, and a fiber should be at the very end. Now in our Honda TRX450Rs, where we're using the 0607 CRF450R dirt bike clutch packs, we start with a fiber, alternate to a steel, and so forth until the end. OEM baskets have a separate groove out here for the last clutch fiber. The manual says to stick the last fiber in that other groove. You don't necessarily have to do that, and this aftermarket basket does not have the extra outer groove out here. All the fibers go in the same slot. Next step will be to put our clutch rod back in, along with the needle bearings. And then to make sure it's seated properly, you can go over to the left side of the engine with the clutch actuator rod, work it back and forth a little bit to make sure the rod is seated and moves when actuated. And then don't forget to put this little washer on the end of these needle bearings for the clutch rod. Next, our pressure plate will go back on, followed by our clutch springs, and then the clutch spring bolts, or a lockout if you've got it. And the bolts for these clutch springs should be torqued to 9 foot-pounds. Okay, now that you got your clutch springs in and torqued down, it's time to either put your clutch cover back on or your right side outer case, depending on which one you removed. If you took off your right side outer case, before putting it back on, make sure you've got the piece that goes here along with the O-ring, and make sure this piece on the counterbalancer is going to align properly with the water pump that's actually in the right side outer case. Make sure your gasket surfaces are nice and clean. Make sure your gasket is in good shape or replace it. And the same goes if you took off just your clutch cover. Make sure that O-ring is in good shape and that its seating surface is clean as well. Okay, now with your side case back installed, you can put your kicker back on if you got a kicker version bike, and then don't forget to fill it back up with transmission fluid, engine oil, and coolant. Alright guys, that's a wrap for this episode. Hopefully you learned something. This is my son Clay. He wanted to be in an episode of Hot Boys Garage. How old are you, Clay?
3.
Hopefully you'll see him in a few more episodes of Hot Boys Garage. As always, hit the like button and subscribe if you liked the video. In between episodes, you can follow me on social media at Hot Boys Racing on Instagram, and just search Hot Boys Racing with 2 T's on Facebook for our ATV drag racing page. And thanks for watching. Good job, buddy. Thank you. You did great, bud.